Introduction. Why learn from medieval peasants? All right, buckle up, because today we're diving into a survival manual written by some of the toughest folks you've probably never wanted to be. Medieval peasants. Yeah, those guys who had zero Wi-Fi, no delivery apps, and definitely no Starbucks to save their lives. Yet somehow they managed to survive brutal winters, crop failures, bandits, and the ever-annoying Lord of the Manor. Spoiler alert, they survived without iPhones or fancy gadgets. And guess what? A lot of their tricks still work today. Shocking, right? You might be thinking, why on earth should I care about medieval peasants? Well, here's the deal. In our cushy, tech-filled world, we've gotten lazy. We assume everything will just work. Phone dead, order an Uber, no food in the fridge, grab some takeout, lost in the woods, call for help. But what if all that suddenly went poof? Power outage? Global apocalypse? Zombie invasion? Okay, maybe not zombies, but you get the point. Suddenly, knowing how to survive like a medieval peasant isn't just cool trivia. It's a legit skill. And let's be honest, peasants had the ultimate survival skill set. They didn't just survive, they thrived in conditions that would make modern campers cry into their protein bars. They knew how to find food where there was none, how to protect themselves without a bulletproof vest, and how to keep going when everything sucked. Plus, they did it with style, or well, with a wooden stick and a bucket on their head. Either way, it worked. In this video, I'm going to spill the medieval tea on how peasants survived and how you can steal their hacks to boss life today. No boring history lesson here, just real practical stuff mixed with a little sarcasm, some irony, and maybe a few laughs. Think of it as Medieval Life Hacks 101, but with less plague and more street smarts. So, if you've ever wondered how people lived without Google or Netflix, or if you just want to impress your friends at the next apocalypse-themed party, stay tuned, because by the end of this, you'll know how to survive like a peasant. And yeah, that means actually living when the chips are down. Ready to ditch your modern comfort bubble and learn some old-school survival skills? Let's go. Food and water. The OG survival essentials. All right, so you've accepted that medieval peasants actually had some skills worth stealing. Now let's talk about the absolute basics of survival: food and water. Because, spoiler alert, you're not going to make it very far if you're just staring at your phone screen and hoping a pizza magically appears. Medieval peasants didn't have supermarkets, microwaves, or Uber Eats. Nope, they had to get creative. Their whole diet was basically whatever the land gave them, and boy was that sometimes brutal. Think stale bread, some weird porridge, root veggies, and the occasional bit of meat if the local lord was feeling generous, or if you were sneaky enough to snag a rabbit. But here's the kicker. Peasants were pros at stretching every crumb. Nothing went to waste. If they found mushrooms, they had to know which ones wouldn't kill them, because, spoiler, a lot will. They'd dry fruits and veggies to make them last through the harsh winters. Sound familiar? Yeah, it's basically medieval meal prep. And water? Forget fancy filters or bottled water. They drank from streams, wells, and rain catchments. But they had tricks to avoid dying from the usual medieval water hazards, like, well, everything. Boiling water was a game changer, and peasants knew it. If you could boil your water, you basically dodged the plague of diarrhea. Literally? So, how does all this medieval wisdom help you today? First, learn to store your food smart. Freeze your leftovers, dry some fruits, and for God's sake, learn to identify edible wild plants before you start munching random leaves. And if you're out hiking or prepping for a blackout, don't underestimate the power of boiling water. A simple pot on the fire can save your life and your stomach. Also, peasants often ate seasonally. No fresh strawberries in winter, sorry. That meant adapting and making the best of what was around. If you want to survive like them, you got to be flexible too. Stock up on root veggies and canned goods that last long, and know how to prep them without your fancy gadgets. Finally, a fun little tip. Peasants believed in some food superstitions, like garlic keeping evil spirits away. Okay, maybe that's not scientifically proven, but hey, a little garlic won't hurt your breath or your survival chances. So next time your phone battery dies and the pizza delivery guy ghosts you, remember, medieval peasants survived way worse. If they could do it with stale bread and muddy water, you can survive with a bit of prep and a good attitude. Clothing and weather protection. How to stay warm without a North Face jacket. All right, so you've got your food and water situation sort of figured out? Congrats. But now, let's talk about something that medieval peasants faced every single day. The weather. And spoiler alert, it wasn't like they could just slap on a trendy North Face jacket and call it a day. Nope, they had to get creative to survive the rain, snow, and freezing cold. Imagine living in a world where waterproof meant a thick wool cloak that probably smelled like a farm and had more holes than Swiss cheese. That was the reality. Peasants wore layers, lots of them. Think rough linen shirts, heavy wool tunics, and cloaks that doubled as blankets. If it got really nasty, they'd pile on animal skins. Stylish? Not really. Effective? Absolutely. And let's talk about rain, because, spoiler, Europe is basically the original wet blanket. Peasants used broad-brimmed hats made from straw or felt to keep the water off their faces. Fancy umbrellas? Yeah, those were for nobles. Instead, the average peasant just got soaked, and if they were lucky, had a thick cloak to keep their core warm. Cold winters? That was a nightmare. Without central heating or electric blankets, peasants relied on layering, fire pits, and good old-fashioned huddling together. Ever heard the phrase sleeping in shifts? That was a thing. Someone would stay awake near the fire while others tried not to freeze. Talk about teamwork. So how does this translate today? If you're ever stuck outside in bad weather, layering is your best friend. Don't just throw on one big jacket and call it quits. Wear several thin layers to trap heat. And remember, keeping your head and feet warm is crucial. That's where most heat escapes. Oh, and waterproof gear? If you don't have any, improvise. A poncho made from a tarp or even a big trash bag, yeah, gross but effective, can keep you dry. Straw hats? Maybe skip those. But you get the idea. Be creative, be prepared, and never underestimate how miserable being wet and cold can make you. So next time you complain about a little drizzle ruining your day, think about those medieval peasants trudging through mud in torn cloaks. If they could survive that, you can definitely survive a rainy hike or a power outage without turning into a shivering mess. Tools and improvisation. How to make do when you've got nothing. So you're out there thinking you need the latest gadget or some fancy multi-tool to survive. Think again. Medieval peasants didn't have Leathermans or Swiss Army knives. They had sticks, stones, and whatever they could grab with their two hands. And guess what? It worked. Hard. Peasants were masters of improvisation. A broken plow? No problem. They'd hack together something with wood and metal scraps and get right back to work. Need to build a shelter? They'd use branches, mud, and grass. No Home Depot required. This DIY spirit kept them alive, and honestly, you could learn a thing or two. Imagine being stranded without your smartphone or GPS. Peasants didn't just sit around and panic. They used their tools and their brains to survive. They knew how to sharpen a stick into a spear for hunting, how to carve a bowl from wood, and even how to make simple rope from plants. Today, if you're stuck without your fancy camping gear, you could still survive with a bit of creativity and some basic knowledge. Here's a fun fact. Peasants often repurposed tools for totally different jobs. A sickle wasn't just for cutting grain. It could be a weapon or a digging tool in a pinch. Your Swiss Army knife might do a million things, but these guys made everything work with just a few basic items. So, what's the takeaway? Don't get too dependent on technology or fancy gear. Learn how to make do with what you have. Need to start a fire? If you don't have a lighter, a flint stone and some dry tinder will do the trick. No rope? Learn to braid grasses or vines. Need a container? Hollow out a piece of wood or find a gourd. In other words, survival is all about creativity and using your environment. The peasants survived because they could think on their feet and turn almost nothing into something useful. So next time you lose your phone or your gadgets break, don't freak out. Channel your inner medieval peasant and MacGyver your way through it. Trust me, your future self will thank you. Medieval medicine, herbal hacks that actually work all right, so you've got food, water, clothes, and some tools. Great. But what happens when you get sick, cut yourself, or catch some nasty bug? Spoiler: medieval peasants didn't have Google or WebMD. No quick trip to the urgent care either. They had to get crafty with what nature gave them. And surprisingly, some of those old-school remedies still hold up today. Let's be real, medieval medicine was a mixed bag. Some treatments were total nonsense, looking at you, leeches and bloodletting, but peasants relied heavily on herbs and plants that actually had medicinal properties. Things like garlic, lavender, chamomile, and yarrow were basically their pharmacy. Garlic wasn't just for keeping vampires away, although that's a fun bonus. It's a natural antibiotic and anti-inflammatory, meaning it can help fight infections and reduce swelling. So that garlic bread you're eating could be saving your life someday. Chamomile tea, great for calming nerves and easing digestion, something we all need after a stressful day. Peasants also used honey, yep, plain old honey, to treat wounds. Honey's natural antibacterial properties helped prevent infections and even sped up healing. Next time you scrape your knee, don't just slap on a Band-Aid. A dab of honey might actually do some good. But beware, not every plant is your friend. Some medieval remedies were downright dangerous. That's why peasants learned their herbs from elders, trial and error, and a fair share of unfortunate accidents. So if you're tempted to go wild foraging today, get a guide or at least a reliable app that can tell you what's safe. Here's a killer tip straight from the peasants. If you're stuck in the wild and injured, look for plants with soft, fuzzy leaves or strong smells. Many of these are medicinal. Just don't eat anything that looks like it belongs in a witch's potion book unless you know what you're doing. In short, medieval medicine was a combo of practical knowledge and a bit of hope. They didn't have hospitals, but they had nature's pharmacy. And in a pinch, learning these herbal hacks might keep you alive when modern medicine isn't an option. So, next time you catch a cold or get a scrape, remember, sometimes old-school plant-based remedies are the real MVPs. Self-defense and safety. No sword needed, just street smarts. Okay, listen up. Medieval peasants didn't have guns, pepper spray, or even much in the way of weapons. Their security system was mostly their wits, a few basic tools, and a whole lot of hustle. So if you think surviving means packing heat or mastering ninja moves, think again. Sometimes the best defense is just knowing how not to get into trouble. First, peasants knew their neighborhood, literally. They understood who the shady characters were, where danger lurked, and how to avoid it. Modern-day equivalent? Don't wander sketchy alleys at midnight, and trust your gut if something feels off. Knowing your environment is step one in not becoming medieval roadkill. Now, what about actual attacks? Peasants had simple but effective ways to protect themselves. A sturdy stick, a sharp farming tool, or even a heavy rock could turn the tables fast. But more often than not, they relied on surprise and speed. Running away was usually the smartest move. Spoiler, no one's going to judge you for sprinting like your life depends on it, because it probably does. There's also the power of community. Peasants didn't survive alone. They banded together. If you're out in the wild or even in the city, traveling with others and watching each other's backs is pure survival gold. Lone wolves? Cool for movies, but not so much in real life. Oh, and here's a fun medieval twist. Some peasants kept dogs not just for fun, but as early warning systems. Today, your dog, a trusty phone, or even a whistle can give you that edge. Also, peasants knew the art of negotiation. Avoiding conflict was often better than winning a fight. If some jerk was looking for trouble, talking your way out or finding common ground could save your hide. Sounds like good advice for literally any century. So, what's the takeaway? You don't need a sword or a gun to stay safe. You need awareness, a bit of courage, and a dash of common sense. Pay attention to your surroundings, carry something sturdy if you want, and remember, running away like your life depends on it is always a valid strategy. Trust me, if peasants could survive marauding bandits with just a stick and street smarts, you can definitely handle your daily commute. Shelter and sleeping. How to catch Z's without a mattress. So you've got food, water, clothes, and you know how to keep yourself safe. Now let's talk about where you're actually going to sleep when the medieval apocalypse hits, or you just lose power for a week. Spoiler alert, peasants didn't have memory foam mattresses or heated blankets. Their idea of comfort was a straw-filled sack on a dirt floor. Yeah, sounds cozy, right? But here's the thing. Peasants got really good at making the best out of what they had. Their shelters were simple but effective. Mostly, they lived in small wooden huts with thatched roofs, made from straw or reeds. It might sound basic, but it kept the rain out and the wind mostly at bay, which was a huge deal when you had zero heating. Inside, they'd use straw or dried grass as bedding, basically nature's version of a mattress. It's not going to win any luxury awards, but it does insulate you from the cold, damp floor, which is super important for staying warm and healthy. And hey, at least you weren't sleeping on rocks or straight on the dirt. Peasants also understood the power of fire. A small hearth inside the hut provided warmth and kept critters away. Plus, the smoke helped keep bugs out, which is something we still battle with today. Just don't fall asleep too close, or you might wake up smelling like a barbecue. Now, for modern survivalists, the lesson is clear. You don't need a fancy tent or a high-tech sleeping bag to catch some decent Z's. Learn to build a simple shelter from what you have. Fallen branches, leaves, even a tarp can work wonders. And if you're camping, bring a sleeping pad or something to keep you off the cold ground. That's a game changer. Oh, and if you're indoors but the power's out, layer up your blankets, sleep with socks, and find a way to keep your feet warm. Peasants knew that keeping extremities warm is key to a good night's sleep. Finally, the social factor. Peasants often slept in communal spaces, which meant warmth from body heat and less chance of waking up alone in a pile of rat droppings. Sharing warmth was a survival tactic, and honestly, it's pretty comforting to know you're not alone when things get rough. So yeah, medieval peasants might not have had Tempur-Pedic, but they knew how to survive the night. And if you want to be a survival pro, you'll take those lessons to heart, because a good night's sleep is the foundation for everything else. Fire. The original life hack. All right, let's get real. Fire was the medieval peasants' version of Wi-Fi. Without it, nothing worked. No cooking, no warmth, no light, and definitely no scaring off the creepy crawlies. Fire was life, and peasants had to know how to make it happen, even when everything was wet or their matches were as mythical as dragons. So how did they do it? Forget your modern lighters and fancy fire starters. Peasants used flint and steel, rubbing sticks together or striking stones to create sparks. This wasn't a quick swipe and bam. It could take patience, skill, and a lot of frustration. Sound familiar? It's like trying to assemble IKEA furniture without the instructions. Once they got the spark, they had to nurture it. Dry tinder, think dried grass, leaves, or even bark, was their gold. If the tinder was damp, they were basically toast. The secret was layering, starting with the smallest, driest stuff, then gradually adding bigger sticks and logs. It was all about feeding the fire without smothering it. And here's a pro tip. Peasants often carried a smoldering coal in a boxer pot, so they could restart the fire quickly the next day without starting from scratch. Imagine lugging around your own personal mini-fire. Talk about dedication. Why does this matter today? Because fire is still the ultimate survival tool. Need to cook food, boil water, or stay warm? Fire is your best friend. And if you lose your lighter or matches, knowing how to start a fire the old-fashioned way can save your skin. So next time you complain about your lighter running out of fuel, think about peasants trying to get a fire going in the rain with nothing but rocks and patience. If they could do that, you can definitely learn a few tricks to keep your flame alive. Literally. Hygiene and disease. How peasants kept it together, sort of. All right, buckle up, because here comes the not-so-glamorous part of medieval peasant life, hygiene and disease. Spoiler alert, it wasn't pretty, and they definitely didn't have Dove soap or hand sanitizer. But somehow they managed to avoid turning into walking plagues, most of the time. First, let's set the scene. No running water in every home, no toilets like we know them. Peasants used chamber pots and outhouses, which were basically holes in the ground. Charming, right? Bathing was rare, mostly because clean water was a precious resource and because soaking in cold rivers wasn't exactly a spa day. So how did they stay clean enough not to get sick all the time? Well, peasants got creative. They used herbs like rosemary and lavender in their clothes and homes to mask the smell and maybe even fight bacteria. And washing hands? Yeah, it wasn't a daily ritual, but when they could, they used water mixed with ash or vinegar to scrub up. Now, about disease, medieval peasants were living in a petri dish of germs surrounded by rats, fleas, and unwashed humans. Plagues and infections were terrifyingly common, but some peasants developed surprisingly good survival habits out of necessity. For example, they knew to isolate the sick, kind of like social distancing, centuries before it was cool. The key to survival was sometimes just luck and strong immune systems, but also knowing when to avoid certain areas, like the stinking, overcrowded parts of town where disease thrived. Plus, natural remedies and simple cleanliness, even if limited, helped reduce the worst effects. For us today, the lesson is clear. Hygiene isn't just about smelling good or looking nice, it's a survival tactic. Wash your hands, clean your wounds, and don't ignore the basics, even if you think your phone's germy screen is worse. So next time you complain about washing your hands or taking a shower, remember medieval peasants who had way less and still found ways to keep going. Spoiler, you're way luckier with modern plumbing, so don't waste it. Bartering and community, how to trade like a medieval pro. All right, so you're surviving the food, water, shelter, and not dying from disease part. Congrats. Now comes the social game, bartering. Because medieval peasants didn't have credit cards, Venmo, or Amazon Prime, they had to get pretty slick at trading stuff. And trust me, bartering was an art form, and one that still has lessons for us today. Imagine you have a basket of eggs, but desperately need some wool to patch your clothes before winter. You couldn't just swipe your card or send a text asking for help. Instead, you'd have to find a neighbor who needed eggs and had wool to spare. Then negotiate. This wasn't just a casual swap. It was survival economics with stakes as high as your next meal. Peasants developed a knack for making deals work. They knew when to hold firm, when to sweeten the deal with a little extra, and how to build trust. Because if you cheated your neighbors, word would spread fast, and suddenly no one would trade with you. Reputation mattered big time. Plus, bartering wasn't just about goods. Services counted too. Need help fixing your roof? Trade some fresh veggies for a day of labor. Got a sick kid? Maybe swap a bit of honey for herbal medicine. This kind of community interdependence was crucial. Peasants literally depended on each other. Here's the kicker for today. The principles of bartering still apply, especially when money is tight or in a crisis. Think about skill sharing, trading favors, or swapping items instead of buying new stuff. It's eco-friendly, budget-smart, and hey, it builds relationships, something we desperately need in the digital age. Also, medieval peasants attended markets and fairs, social hubs where trading, gossip, and news all flowed freely. So if you're holed up at home or prepping for tough times, don't forget the power of community. Networking isn't just a corporate buzzword, it's a survival strategy. So next time you scroll through online sales or impulse buy something you don't need, remember the medieval peasant hustling at the market, negotiating for wool and eggs. Maybe it's time we all got a little better at bartering, or at least appreciating the value of what we already have. Mental toughness. How medieval peasants kept their sanity. All right, let's get real for a minute. Surviving medieval life wasn't just about food, fire, and avoiding bandits. It was a serious mental game. No Netflix, no social media, and definitely no therapist on speed dial. Peasants faced constant hardships, and their minds had to be just as tough as their bodies. So how did they keep their sanity? Spoiler, it wasn't always pretty, but it worked. First off, peasants had to embrace grit. Life was rough, long hours, hard labor, lousy weather, and zero guarantees. Complaining? Sure, but more importantly, they kept going. They developed a kind of mental toughness that modern self-help books talk about, but they learned it the hard way by surviving brutal winters and bad harvests. Humor was a secret weapon. Even when life sucked, peasants cracked jokes, told stories, and found moments of laughter. Think of it as their ancient version of memes. Sarcasm, irony, and playful banter helped them cope with the grind. Because sometimes, if you don't laugh at the absurdity of your life, you might just lose it. Religion and superstition also played a huge role. Believing in something bigger, whether saints, spirits, or just luck, gave peasants hope and a sense of control. Even if some rituals seem weird to us now, they provided comfort and routine in chaotic times. Another trick? Community bonding. Neighbors helped each other not just with work, but emotionally too. Festivals, market days, and church gatherings were social outlets that boosted morale. Isolation was deadly, so staying connected kept minds healthier. For today's survivalists, the lesson is crystal clear. Mental toughness matters as much as physical skills. You can have the best gear, but if your mind cracks, you're done. Find ways to stay positive, lean on your community, and don't underestimate the power of humor. And hey, if medieval peasants could keep their heads despite living in mud huts and dodging plague, so can you. So, next time life gets tough, channel your inner medieval peasant. Grit, jokes, and a little faith might just be your best survival tools. Food preservation. Because spoiled food is a no-go. All right, let's talk about one of the biggest headaches peasants faced: keeping their food from turning into a science experiment. Remember, no refrigerators, no freezers, no Snapchats to order pizza when your supplies ran low. If you couldn't preserve your harvest, you were basically signing up for starvation or some seriously nasty stomach issues. So how did peasants make their food last? First off, drying was king. Fruits, herbs, meat, even fish were hung up to dry out in the sun or by the fire. This simple trick removed moisture, which is like kryptonite to bacteria and mold. If you think sun-dried tomatoes are fancy now, peasants were all about it, except theirs didn't come in cute little packages. Smoking meat was another classic move. They'd build a smoky fire and hang meat above it, letting the smoke slowly cure it. Not only did this preserve the meat, but it gave it a distinctive flavor, kind of like the original barbecue. Sure, it took time and patience, but starving isn't fun, so the effort was worth it. Salting was the go-to method for preserving meat and fish. Salt draws out moisture and creates an environment bacteria hate. Peasants rubbed salt all over their catches and cuts, then stored them in cool, dry places. No fancy vacuum sealers needed, just a lot of salt and a bit of know-how. Fermentation was also part of the game. Think sauerkraut, pickles, and beer. It sounds weird, but fermentation actually preserves food by creating acids that keep bacteria at bay. Plus, it adds flavor and some gut-friendly probiotics. Medieval peasants might have been the original hipsters enjoying sauerkraut centuries before it was trendy. Here's the survival takeaway. Knowing how to preserve food means you're not at the mercy of daily harvests or grocery runs. Whether you're storing for winter or prepping for emergencies, drying, smoking, salting, and fermenting are all timeless hacks worth mastering. So next time you complain about your fancy fridge running out of power, remember peasants who kept their food edible through sheer ingenuity. And maybe try drying some fruit or making your own sauerkraut. Your future self and stomach will thank you. Tools and crafting. DIY like a medieval peasant. All right, so you've got food, fire, shelter, and the mental toughness to keep going. But what about the tools? Medieval peasants didn't have Amazon deliveries or hardware stores on every corner. If they wanted something, they either made it themselves or traded for it. Basically, they were the original DIY pros, and honestly, we could learn a thing or two from their hustle. First off, peasants used whatever materials were around: wood, stone, bone, even scrap metal. They knew how to shape these into useful tools like knives, digging sticks, or simple farming implements. Forget power tools, think hand-forged blades and careful carving with a sharp stone. It was slow work, but it got the job done. One of the coolest parts? They were masters at recycling. Broken tools didn't just get tossed out. They got repaired, reforged, or repurposed. A broken blade might become a scraper. A cracked pot could turn into a flower planter. In a world with limited resources, nothing was wasted. Peasants also had basic blacksmith skills or access to a local smith. This was crucial for making and maintaining metal tools, nails, horseshoes, and even simple weapons. Without a good blacksmith, you were basically stuck with blunt sticks and broken dreams. And here's a little secret. Creativity was king. When peasants couldn't find exactly what they needed, they improvised. Need a fishing hook? Bend a piece of wire or bone? Need a basket? Weave it from reeds or vines. This kind of thinking kept them alive through shortages and rough times. For us modern survivalists, the lesson is clear. Having basic crafting skills can be a total game changer. Knowing how to make and fix your own tools means less dependency on stores and more confidence when things go sideways. So next time you grab a screwdriver or order some gadgets online, think about the medieval peasant carefully shaping a blade with stone and fire. There's something satisfying about making stuff with your own hands. And who knows, it might just save your life someday. The peasant mindset. Why attitude was the ultimate survival tool. All right, we've covered food, water, fire, shelter, tools, and even mental toughness. But here's the real secret weapon medieval peasants had that no one talks about enough: their mindset. Because surviving brutal times isn't just about what you have, it's about how you think. And peasants? They had attitude. First off, peasants were ridiculously adaptable. When the harvest failed or the weather turned against them, they didn't just sit and sulk. They found ways to make do, learned new skills, and kept pushing forward. Modern life teaches us to expect comfort and convenience. Peasants taught us to hustle, improvise, and never give up. Next, they mastered the art of patience. Life moved slowly back then. Crops grew on their own schedule, not yours. Waiting was part of the game. Today, with our instant gratification culture, that's a tough skill to learn, but it's vital for survival. Knowing when to act and when to wait can mean the difference between thriving and barely scraping by. Peasants also had a healthy dose of humor and irony, a sarcastic wink at life's absurdities. When everything is hard, sometimes laughing at your misfortune is the only way to keep your sanity. So, don't underestimate the power of a good laugh, even when the chips are down. And finally, community mindset. Peasants knew survival wasn't solo. It was team sport. Sharing, helping, trusting neighbors, even when times were tough. That sense of connection kept them alive, and it's something we desperately need today. So here's the bottom line. The medieval peasant mindset is like a survival Swiss Army knife. Adaptable, patient, a bit sarcastic, and fiercely communal. If you can adopt even a fraction of that attitude, you'll be way ahead of the game, whether you're prepping for the apocalypse or just dealing with Monday morning. Remember, survival isn't just about tools or skills. It's about the mindset that keeps you moving forward when everything else tries to knock you down. And peasants? They were absolute masters of that game. Of